I've heard many times, oh, that's really good, we never thought of that. Well, of course not, because we haven't walked in these shoes. And so that you've got people that have walked in the shoes. And so our contribution is really valid.
Being able to share your experience with somebody else with womb cancer while you're delivering information to the researcher has been so beneficial, because most of us have never met another person with womb cancer. And some kind of magic happens actually when we're in the room together.
Hello there, I'm Sarah McCluskey, and this is Research Adjacent. Each episode, I talk to amazing research adjacent professionals about what they do and why it makes a difference. Keep listening to find out why we think the research adjacent space is where the real magic happens. Hello there, and welcome along to episode 48 of the Research Adjacent podcast. In this episode, I'm talking to Helen White and Danni Elster. They are both volunteers with Peaches Womb Cancer Trust, where they contribute to research as experts by experience. Helen is the patient voices lead, and she coordinates the volunteers, including Danni, who is one of the group's most active members. You'll hear all about why they wanted to get involved in research, as well as some of the projects they've been involved with. I was particularly interested to hear about how they have challenged researchers on sensitive issues like routine pregnancy tests and obesity to be more considerate of patients. Also, just to say thanks to Louisa Ellens, who introduced me to Helen and Danni. She's a grant writer who has been working with the Peaches Womb Cancer Trust, and I know listens to a lot of episodes, so thank you very much, Louisa, for the introduction. Before we get on with this episode though, I wonder if I could ask for your help. On the 13th of August, I'll be putting out episode number 50, and this feels like a big milestone for me. So in that episode, you'll hear from me and some former guests about what being on the podcast has meant for them. And I would love to hear from you too. In the show notes, you'll find a link to a voice note service called SpeakPipe. If you click on the link, record your thoughts, and then ping the file over to me. I'd particularly love to hear about what the podcast means to you, anything you've learned, or anything that you've taken out into the real world. If you have any issues with the recorder, you can send your thoughts via an email to hello@researchadjacent.com. Please send anything that you would like to be included to me by the 30th of July so that I've got time to edit it all together. But for now, back to this episode. Listen on to hear all about Helen and Danni. Helen and Danni, lovely to have you on the podcast. Thanks so much for coming along to join us. And it would be lovely if we can begin our conversation by hearing a bit about what it is that you do in this research adjacent space. I don't know who wants to go first.
Thank you, Sarah, for having us on your podcast today. So I'm a volunteer for Peaches Womb Cancer Trust. That's a charity that was set up in 2020 by a team of medical professionals who all work closely with women affected by womb cancer. And they recognised that there was this unmet need to provide specific support to people living with and beyond womb cancer. Because actually womb cancer, a lot of people haven't heard of it. You know, it's relatively common. You know, nearly 10,000 people are diagnosed with womb cancer every year in the UK. So it is the most common gynae cancer. But until Peaches came along, you know, there was no national charity that was dedicated specifically to supporting patients with womb cancer. So I teamed up with Peaches in 2021 to launch its Patient Voices group, the aim of which was to connect anyone affected by womb cancer, be that the patient, somebody who'd been through the womb cancer themselves, or their loved ones, with researchers to help shape research, which is so critically important if we're to make sure that the research tackles what's most important to the people who experience that condition.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for that. And Danni, tell us a bit about how you're connected.
Yeah, so Helen set the scene really well. So I'm somebody with lived experience of womb cancer. I was diagnosed in 2019. And so when you were diagnosed with cancer, certainly in my case, I was sort of looking for, not support necessarily, but places I could go in the third sector mostly that I could just, find some information and read about. And when I was specifically looking for something like the patients panel, because I wanted to use my experience in a way that could bring some good, and that I could really just sort of reflect on what I've been through, and perhaps, how to improve it for people in the future. So that's how I accessed Peaches. I sort of dropped on Peaches, which is a wonderful charity, and because it's very specific to womb cancer. which is a very important thing when you've been through a cancer experience. Everybody's cancer experience is different. And so I kind of fell onto the sort of the Peaches website and the patients panel, and I've been involved in quite a few researches. I think Helen always sees my name come up first whenever she puts something out. So Helen's fantastic and is our portal for kind of telling us all in the community, oh, there's this available, and there are certain parameters that sometimes you don't fit. And then we all sort of, express our interest and then sort of take it from there. Some things I get involved with and some things I don't, and it's fine. But it's been a really positive experience, and I've been involved with some really interesting things in research.
Oh, I think we definitely want to hear about some of those as we go through. So, so maybe, Helen, tell us a bit about how it works, how your role and how you sit in the community that you help to coordinate.
Well, the way it works is we need people to join.
Mm-hmm.
So actually going back on what Danni just said, Danni was one of the very first people who joined Peaches Patient Voices. We launched this back in October 2021. And I think within, we were stepping into the unknown. We didn't know how many people, if anybody, was going to join. But within about the first couple of weeks, we had about a dozen or so people join, which was fantastic because we had a researcher lined up wanting to speak to anybody who joined. So when anybody gets in contact with me who's keen on joining, I'll send them some information, basically telling them how it works. So essentially, if a researcher contacts me with some details about their research study, how they would like to involve people who've been affected with womb cancer, I will make sure I've got all the details of that, and then I will send it out to the group. And as Danni says, you can choose to take part in something, get involved in something, or not. And there's a whole range of opportunities that our members do get involved in, from reviewing a lay summary. We had one of those that I sent out last week, to sort of full-blown involvement in trial management groups, etc., in clinical trials, a whole spectrum of involvement. Yeah, I think that's it in a nutshell. I mean, I can expand on that if you like, but Danni might be able to elaborate a little bit more.
Well, I wonder, maybe, Danni, you could tell us about a couple of the examples of things that you've been involved with, and that'll help us to understand.
Actually, in advance of this podcast, I went back to my very well-organised emails and just looked at what I've been involved in, because I had to sort of remind myself, and it was like, oh my goodness, I'd forgotten about all the stuff that I have been involved with. And what I like about it is it's the kind of the breadth of sort of opportunity. So I have been involved in some research per se. So there's been research around sort of focus groups just about womb cancer, but also I was involved in a research about fatigue. Mm-hmm. I think it was a PhD student actually involved in fatigue, and a certain app to use to monitor your activities and to monitor your fatigue and your physical activities. So that was actually being involved in some research. But then there's also opportunities to be involved in the creation of research, as Helen said, in the trial at the sort of stage, so pre the research. And that has ranged from being involved. I'm involved in two right now, and they're very different, and it's really interesting. So one is involved with a pharmaceutical company, who I was a little cynical when I first sort of thought about it, and I thought, well, I don't know, I don't know why I have a sort of I had some concerns around that, which is ridiculous because I'm very happy to take any drugs that are going to keep me alive. And it's been it's an ongoing thing. So it's a pharma company who are developing new drugs, and it's fascinating to hear what they're involved in. And they are developing drugs that are keeping people alive, and it's amazing. People on stage 4 cancer, and that's been a very interesting experience because it's quite corporate, but a very sort of a research team. And so we have sort of, myself and my colleagues who have been involved in it have sort of relived our experience and given our opinions. And that's been very interesting because it's been a pharma company. And then I'm also involved in a research trial at one of the UK university. And that's about developing a research, it's the pre-research stage, so it's the trial stage. And again, so they've had sort of people with lived experience contributing to the research per se, but also, the patient leaflets that are given, the patient advice that will be given, when they will be giving that kind of advice, at what stage they will be saying certain things, at what stage they will be asking people to be involved in the research. And it's those things that, I can really bring, people like myself can really bring that insight. And it's really important to say here, though, that obviously my lived experience is just my lived experience, and everybody is very different. And that's why it's good to have 2 or 3 people because I don't represent everybody with wound cancer, obviously, that's had wound cancer. But it's very interesting. The researchers really sort of, appreciate. Oh, I've heard many times, oh, that's really good. We never thought of that. Well, of course not, because we haven't walked in these shoes. And so that you've got people that have walked in the shoes. And so our contribution is really valid. And I would also say that I felt in all the things I've taken part in, especially in those more sort of formal environments, research committees, and I come from a university background. I'm not an academic, but I worked at universities for many years. And so I like that academic environment anyway. But the more formal committees, I felt very appreciated. I haven't felt that it was just tokenism. I haven't felt it was just a tick box. We've been part of the team. And that's been a really positive experience. So it's a real wide range of things. I mean, Helen will know, we've been involved in making sort of contributions to videos that are going to be used, and really, really wide ranging. And that's what I like about it, is that it's also different.
Yeah, fantastic. And it's brilliant to hear that you feel like your contributions have been really valued, that you've been really listened to. Can you see examples of where that's making a difference? Where they've changed the wording of a patient leaflet or something like that based on feedback?
Yes, absolutely. So, well, certainly we were involved in Helen was heavily involved in this, in contributing to a video that was being made, and it was incredible, because it was like, oh, if I'd have had this when I was diagnosed, it would have made my diagnosis so much easier. So just sort of encouraging people, that people may think something is too simple, and it's like, no, it really isn't. Keep it that simple. That's what we want. Don't assume I know what a biomarker is. I don't. And even if you remember, Helen, we were saying that I don't really know what cancer is. And it's the kind of thing that you don't really ask when you're diagnosed, because you're kind of just taken along this treatment plan, and you don't really get the chance to ask those questions. And in the research I'm still involved in the university, interestingly, it was one of their protocols that they always, for any research that they ask, or they do, I think they, by default in the protocol, they would carry out a pregnancy test. And I found that very interesting. So I queried it and said, so why would you be carrying out a pregnancy test? And they were like, well, because that's just it's in the protocol for all these kinds of research. And it really had to be brought to their attention how, I understand what's in your protocol, but how inappropriate that is for a whole range of reasons. Mm-hmm. Because, and the scientific people, the medical people, they back me up, that you can't, if you haven't had hysterectomy, guess what, guys? Can't get pregnant. And also just that thing of, I was in my 50s when I was diagnosed, and I don't have children, and I never wanted children. So for me, it was not an issue. I had no emotional relationship with my womb at all. Mm-hmm. But that's very different for other women, and younger women especially, and just the need to be very, very sensitive around this. So as well as a cancer diagnosis and the thought of, treatment and your prognosis, the research is not in any way that it was just part of their protocol. And they were like, well, we kind of have to do it. And it was like, you have to be sensitive to that kind of thing. If you're going to mention pregnancy in anything to do with wound cancer, you really need to tread very, very carefully, because you won't get people taking part in your research if you don't consider those things. So this is all about how to get people involved in the research, and at a very vulnerable time in their life, how to make them realise that it's a good thing to do. It's going to help other people, may not necessarily help you, but it will help other people. Like, really tread carefully. And we managed to convince the research team that, you're going to have to go to your ethics committee and explain that in this case, that thing in that protocol is not appropriate. Get it signed off, make sure there's due diligence, but it's just not appropriate. So that was really, and it felt like such a small thing to me, but for another woman, it would really have an impact. And as I say, it would also prevent them getting people they need for their research. So it would completely backfire on them. So that was very sort of, satisfying in a strange way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Danni, you brought up so many things there that are so important about what we do. I mean, the language is critical. I know you and I have had conversations about this, and we've seen documents come through to us with words like survivor in them. And I know you and I don't like that. It's fine. Some people may like that, but you can't use blanket terms like that, because they will touch a nerve with some people. There's a lot of language around obesity and BMI, which is quite tricky in womb cancer, because many people with womb cancer are obese, and that's a risk factor for developing womb cancer. So, it's really important that you get the patient perspective on that language and to get it right, because, it's important in any information that's going to be in the public domain. That's going to be, in something like a clinical trial, for example, where you're inviting people into the trial, you don't want to put them off with the language. You want it to be sensitive. So that's really, really important. The other point that Danni picked up on there was about not wanting to be the sole person with the sole opinion, because Danni has her own experience and views on womb cancer and has a very different experience. I don't think I introduced myself as I've had experience with womb cancer, but I know my experience is very, very different from Danni's. So we're coming from very different perspectives. But that actually is how Peach's Patient Voices came about, because it was a discussion between myself and some researchers where we identified that I was pretty much the only voice out there of womb cancer with my own particular experience, but that we needed to open this up to a much, much broader audience and to attract a whole diversity of views in, different experiences of cancer, from very early stage to late stage, different ages, ethnicity, the whole spectrum of diversity that we needed to bring into this group, because it's so, so important, if that's being fed into shaping this research going forwards, that all those voices are heard, because we're all individuals and we all come from slightly different angles.
So you've mentioned that you've both got involved with this because you've got lived experience of womb cancer. Danni, you said there that you had some university experience as well, which gave you that interest in the research. For both of you, maybe tell us a little bit about how you heard about Peaches, why you wanted to get involved, why it fitted with the sorts of person you are, the sorts of things you do. I don't know if Danni, you want to go first.
Yeah. So how I got involved with Peaches, I don't know. I literally must have landed on them at some point. I was looking for a womb cancer charity to support me post-treatment, because one of my big beefs, actually, and I bring this up in every research thing I'm involved in, is post-treatment pathways. There's no post-treatment pathway. So you are, it sounds a cliche, but it's true. You are literally at the end of the treatment. Thank you very much. Off your trot, go and live your life. And both from a physical perspective, I still have, as I'm sure many people do, I have some effects. I have lymphedema in my leg. I have some pelvic issues from the radiation. It's all stuff that can be managed, but it's all chronic and it all impacts on your life post-cancer. Plus, of course, you're not the same person post-cancer as you were before. You've been through a difficult experience. So I was obviously landing on it, probably looking for some advice and some support. Interestingly for me, and again, this is why I find it so interesting that everyone's so different, I wasn't looking for support per se. I wasn't looking for a support group. That's not my thing. I'm very resilient. I was able to support myself. What I was looking for was a way to use my experience in a really practical way. So I'm I don't believe that everything happens for a reason, but I do believe that when you do go through experiences, you can do something with it. And it doesn't justify you ever getting cancer, but it means, well, I got it. I'm still here to tell the tale. What can I do with the fact that I've lived it? So I was very much looking for that. Where can I, I'm confident I want my voice to be heard. And so that's why I got involved. I just feel that, and I've done that with other life experiences as well, I have to do something with it. And then it kind of feels that I've got something sort of positive out of it, even though there's nothing sort of positive about it, but something positive has come out of it. It's really important to say as well that, being involved in these things is not for everybody. And I've seen that from some of the people I've been involved with, that, you have to be resilient. You have to be able to talk about your cancer without being worried. And again, every environment I've been in has been incredibly supportive. If you need some time, if so it's not as if they don't recognise that. They do, and it's been lovely. But, it's not for everybody, is what I say as well. And I think you need to know if this is something that, you're going to be okay in, because you need to look after yourself. You don't want it to be a trigger for you. You need to be okay. You are going to have to talk about your experiences. You're going to have to relive your experiences. And you need to be okay with that. And that's why I think it's important. I would encourage anybody to get involved, but just make sure that you're okay with it. Me personally, I enjoy being involved. I enjoy the challenges of the different research opportunities. And I enjoy having to kind of hone my experience to what they need. So it's not just about Danni and her cancer. It's about Danni and her cancer in this context.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me that they want the bits that are relevant to them rather than my whole story and my whole life, as much as I like talking about myself. It's about the bits that they need. And so there's that sort of, intellectual challenge of thinking, okay, well, how can I make that positive contribution rather than just the patient in the room?
That sounds like really valuable advice, but also really interesting insights. Helen, what about you? What's your story?
If I just come on to my story just in a second, just to reflect back on something that Danni said there about coming to this group, not because she was seeking support, but she, wanted to do something positive with this experience. It's really interesting because I think Danni, I hope, will agree, when we have come together as a group, and I've taken part in some of these groups, being able to share your experience with somebody else with womb cancer.
You're right.
While you're delivering information to the researcher has been so beneficial, because most of us have never met another person with womb cancer. And some kind of magic happens actually when we're in the room together, because for once in your life, other people get what you're talking about, even though the experiences are different. So I think that's been it's been an output from creating this group that we never intended, but I think has been fantastic actually. And lots of friendships have struck up as well. So that's really good.
Yeah.
But just coming on to my background to it. So I guess mine was less deliberate in a way, but I think I do share some common sort of background and sort of experience to Danni. So when I was diagnosed, I was offered the chance to join the 100,000 Genomes Project. So I don't know if you're aware about that, but that's sort of a massive research project undertaken in England that's basically led the way to doing lots of research and integrating genomics into the NHS Genomic Medicine Service. And I discovered something called a participant panel about a year or so after my diagnosis. In that first year, although, I was having a good outcome, I'd only needed surgery, I was still sort of psychologically quite impacted by this diagnosis, and you're worried about this thing's going to come back. But I picked up on this thing and I wrote and I asked to join, and I did. And that was fantastic because although that's not specifically like a condition related, it's more about the data and influencing decisions that Genomics England makes about this data. It was an opportunity to get together with a group of people from really diverse backgrounds, people with a background in cancer, rare conditions, people with children who were disabled, and it really opened my eyes actually to the importance of bringing people with diverse opinions together and that sort of collective voice feeding into something that actually influenced decisions. And I think one thing led to another. I soon got linked up with the endometrial cancer, womb cancer research group that was associated with Genomics England. And it was the lead researcher there that I got talking to about the fact that, hey, it's just me doing this, where we need more people in this. My little voice is okay, but we need to open this up. And then along the way, I've got involved in all sorts of other patient and public involvement groups, mostly to do with womb cancer, but broader sort of gynae cancers, genomics. It actually turns out I have Lynch syndrome. I think one of your previous guests coincidentally has Lynch syndrome. Yeah. So, I have a strong interest in sort of hereditary cancer predisposition syndromes as well. Yeah, so that is essentially what led me to Peaches back in 2021, when we were thinking, well, how on earth, we need some platform to launch this group. And with Peaches having formed the year before that, they were up and running, they had a website, they had social media. It was the ideal way in which we could disseminate information about this group, get people to join. The other tricky thing, of course, was to reach out to researchers, because there's no point having a group of people willing to get involved and not letting the researchers know. So, yeah, but we could reach out to them too via social media. I went to a gynae conference in London, and that was a great opportunity to meet researchers there. And some of it's been by word of mouth. But yeah, essentially that's been my journey to where we are today. And we've gone from me, to now, I think it's about 88 people who have joined. Yeah. And this is people who've been through womb cancer themselves. We've got some daughters of mother who's been through womb cancer. I think we have a husband, we have a brother, so we're pretty diverse as things go, I think. And I say a whole spectrum of ages from probably 20s up to 70s. So we cover that whole range of ages too.
Fantastic. And then given the drive that there is now to get patients involved at all stages of research, I imagine that there's quite a lot of demand. I'm actually surprised that you've had to go out and find the researchers. I would have thought they would be beating on the door. How's that process gone?
I mean, that's gone very well. I think we were probably quite busy to start because, we launched and then, let people know we were there. And there were probably some projects sat there waiting to go. And I would say it's troughs and peaks. So, I mean, probably the last 6 months, I don't think I've sent anything out. But actually, Ironically, I sent something out last week and I've one more this morning. I've got another one to come out this afternoon when I've firmed up some details. So it's very much like that. But yeah, people don't know you're there until you tell them. I don't want to pick on them, but particularly academic researchers, if they're working in a relative silo within the university, they may not realise we're out there. So I think it's important to keep banging the drum and letting people know that we're there.
Yeah, well, hopefully this might help to get the word out a little bit further as well. Yeah. So it sounds like generally it's been a pretty positive experience so far from what you both said. Are there any real high points, any things that stand out that you're really proud of having contributed to?
I think all the projects I've been involved in, I think I prefer being involved in creating research projects or being part of the team that's working towards, the trial. Just because I just find that more interesting, and you feel like you're really participating to something that could potentially be an amazing research program that's happening that's going to make a real difference. So to feel part of that feels really good. I have enjoyed the research I've been in as well. Having said that, I've really enjoyed that. I think, every research I've done has been a positive experience. That doesn't mean to say that I have responded positively to the research. Mm-hmm. For example, I didn't particularly find the app on fatigue very helpful, but my contribution in I didn't find the app very helpful on fatigue is obviously part of the research. And that's just because I'm not really an app person, and also because it didn't connect with me. But of course, that is all part of being part of the research. Mm-hmm. So I think it's also important to understand that if you are going to be actually within a research experience, it doesn't matter what your outcome is. Your outcome is still contributing towards something, even if actually, it didn't work for me, but that's okay, because it may work for other people. And that helps them then target it to people who perhaps need it more than I would have needed it when I was than I need it now. So I personally have really enjoyed being part of the bigger research teams. I think, again, I'm a committee person. Mm-hmm. Don't like to admit that, but it's true. So even though committees are all virtual now, I have sat in many committees in universities for hours with big wads of, a big pile of paper in front of me. I like due diligence. I like, that's just it's how I'm wired. That's my DNA. So I really enjoy listening and not understanding everything that's going on, but also just feeling part of a team. And then when it is my turn to say something, and sometimes they say, you haven't said anything. And I go, well, no, I've got nothing to say. But when I do have something to say, or I can really feel that there needs some input, it's very nice to be able to say, can I just say? Yeah. And then I say. Yeah, it's been really positive.
Well, it sounds like you're a huge asset to these teams, Danni, because I think a lot of people, these committee meetings are they would run in the opposite direction. So the fact that you love it is brilliant. That's true.
Yeah, it's not for everyone.
Helen, what about you?
I was just thinking about this while Danni was talking. And I think actually Danni has touched on this. So the original reason for setting up this group was to involve patients and their loved ones in research. So it's that shaping research, designing research for others. But it's become so much more than that. So there's opportunities to take part in research. I think that thing you're mentioning about fatigue, Danni, I think that was you were a participant in that research.
That's the word, participant. Yes.
No, it's fine. It's the terminology is quite confusing. We've also, I think, engaged a wider community of people in research. A good example of that, organised a webinar on genomics. I mean, nobody understands what genomics is, and let alone womb cancer genomics, but that was very popular. And certainly one of our speakers at that there, we've got a video on YouTube, and that's had our highest engagement rate, which I'm quite pleased about. Also, there's been a sort of indirect support for people by meeting each other. And the group, I don't like to use the word resource, but it has become a resource for Peaches. So Peaches is involved in things like nice appraisals of new drugs coming through.
Yeah.
So we've been able to go out to our community. These people already expressed interest in, having their voice heard, and we can ask them to tell us about their experiences, so we can feed that as evidence into these submissions. And that has been, critical in some of these decisions. It's been so valuable. So yeah, but those are the bigger things. But also, there's small things that make me very proud about this. I mean, I mentioned this lay summary that I sent out. I think it was last week now. The researchers said to me, do you think it's okay? It's for a grant application. I can't pay anything. Do you think I'm able to get 4 or 6 people to do this? Well, I sent out the email. Within about 5 hours, I'd had 14 people respond, and I had to say no more.
Yeah.
and I've had some feedback, and it's very varied, which is great because it's different people's opinions. But those sorts of things make me go, wow, this was an important thing to do, and just look at that and look at the benefit that researcher is going to get from all that feedback. So, yeah.
Yeah. Sounds like really making a difference, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
So these things that were not without their challenges. I do like to ask all of my guests if they had a magic wand and they could change something about this world that you find yourselves in, what would you use your magic wand for?
Well, that's it's a very interesting question. So it's not about a magic wand and not having had cancer, because I had it, and so I'm doing something with it. So it's not that. I don't know. I haven't really had a negative experience, to be honest, to be able to say how I would change it, because I can honestly say that I've never felt that I've been in a situation where I've just kind of been there and nobody's appreciated my input. I don't know whether it's just I go to everything with a very positive outlook, so I see the positive. Difficult one. Helen, have you got anything? And I'll have a think.
Yeah, no, you carry on thinking. Danni has had, by the sounds of things, a very positive experience of being involved in research, and that's fantastic. And I would put a big shout out to the womb cancer research community, because I think they are brilliant, actually. And I think they are very welcoming, and they are keen to hear our views. But I don't think that's universal. And I think if I had a magic wand, I would want to see patient and public involvement being more embedded, more routine, part of the norm of research, rather than in some cases it being a tick box exercise to get the grant application in. So I think that would be my magic wand. I think there's a bit of a way to go with that one yet. There's a need to convince some researchers of the value of it. They don't always see it. And there's also a need to find the community of people that they need to tap into. That might sound a bit, here we were 3 years ago with 10,000 people every year being diagnosed with womb cancer, but there was pretty much only me up for doing this. So it's doing something. I'm not saying that there's no one size fits all here, but it's creating something like Peaches Patient Voices that provides this platform of people and does this matchmaking exercise, so researchers can come to a central place and people who are interested can say, yeah, I'd like to do that. That's worked well for us. But yeah, we need the researchers to be on board with involving patients. So a little change in mindset.
Yes, sorry, Helen. I guess I don't know what's out there that hasn't used people, because I've only been involved in things when I've when there's been that participation. So I don't know what percentage that is actually of research where they could have used people with this experience and didn't. And it sounds like Helen's saying that there is still quite a big research community. Helen.
I'll give you an example. I was involved in a group, nothing to do with womb cancer, where I think it was 2 days before a grant submission was due to go in for the Grand Cancer Challenges, I think it's called. It's a big grant awarded for multidisciplinary teams, and they came to tick the PPI box 2 days before, wanted input, wanted a name on the, and you just think, you've not thought this through. They almost don't deserve to get that funding because they don't, because they've not involved patients from early stages. That's the whole point. They need to hear those voices. So yeah, that's probably my worst experience, just to share that.
Well, yeah, but it's only by bringing some attention to it that we can say, this is not right and we need to do better. So, yeah. Yeah, definitely, but more of that. Well, I think we should think about wrapping up our conversation. It's been so lovely to have you both here and to hear your experiences. As I say, amazing to hear that, Danni in particular, you've had such positive experiences. If people want to find out more about the charity, if people want to get involved with the work that they're doing, how can they find you? How can they get in touch?
Well, Peaches has a website, so we can share that link with you to put in the notes. Or if you're interested in Patient Voices itself, you can contact me directly, and that's on patientvoices@peachestrust.org.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And I'll get all of those. I'll put a link for your email in the show notes as well. So it just remains to say thank you so much both for coming along and sharing your experiences.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Yeah, no, thank you, Sarah. It's been great and great to talk to Danni.
Thanks for listening to Research Adjacent. If you're listening in a podcast app, please check you're subscribed and then use the links in the episode description to find full show notes and to follow the podcast on LinkedIn or Instagram. You can also find all the links and other episodes at www.researchadjacent.com. Research Adjacent is presented and produced by Sarah McCluskey, and the theme music is by Lemon Music Studios on Pixabay. And you, yes you, get a big gold star for listening right to the end. See you next time.